What's up, y'all? This is Mike Manza with another Manza Faust Productions video. Today, I am continuing my series I started a couple of months ago, but haven't really followed up on label spotlights. So a couple of months ago, I did an episode on Discord Records. Had a real good time talking about it, and wanted to kind of stay in the same wheelhouse of 80s hardcore. The rise of all these like indie labels, DIY labels, putting out kind of stuff that was related to the local scene that they were representing and their friends' bands and the flavor of what was going on around them. And continuing in that path, today I want to talk about another huge label, sort of in a similar kind of demographic as Discord Records, really clued into the more straight edge, positive hardcore kind of scene that early bands on that label like Minor Threat were clued into. And I want to get into probably the label that really kind of the prototypical label you think of when you think of Youth Crew and all these emerging like hardcore styles in the late 80s. That is Revelation Records. Revelation Records started pretty much around here, man. It started in I believe, 86 out of New Haven, Connecticut. You had a lot of different stuff coming out of New York and Connecticut. Some of the early releases from like Violent Children, which featured Ray Capo, who would go on to Youth of Today. I'm going to talk about them in a bit. And you just had a lot of different stuff going on, and they started up this label as a means of distributing the debut 7-inch from Warzone, that being Lower East Side Crew. And yeah, from there, really successful in putting out a lot of the cool stuff coming out of New York hardcore and the more emerging Connecticut scenes out of New Haven and so forth. So a record they did not release initially, but I feel like really sits well in their catalog. It was originally released by Fist Records, but Warzone, Don't Forget the Struggle, Don't Forget the Streets. This is a repress from a few years ago, I believe 2016. We got it on red vinyl. And I've talked about this record a couple of times on the channel. This is a beast. So many anthemic, great songs, really in that like pocket of great late 80s New York hardcore, a little bit of a straight edge feel, but more just like positive outlook, unity and all these kind of things. You just stick it by your friends, not wanting hardcore to become this big conglomerate and get bought out by the major record labels and all over MTV and shit, powerful messaging and just a great sense of youth energy and just like what New York hardcore was about at that point. So, we're going along, and really the big breakout for me as far as this label goes, Youth of Today, Break Down the Walls, their second LP, I guess. I don't really know if you would consider Can't Close My Eyes an LP. It's on black vinyl, but this is a repress from, I believe, like the late 90s. But this is solid, Youth of Today, not much to be said. Like, great early Youth Crew. Again, the positive outlook of this music, like taking what bands like 7 Seconds and Uniform Choice were doing and adding a bit of like a Cro-Mags vibe to it, Definitely in the vocals by Ray Capo. Uh, it's a lot faster. The aggression is there. You got excellent, like, kind of halftime breakdowns. Make a change, stab in the back, take a stand, break down the walls. Like, you hear these titles and you know what you're getting into. Just very anthemic, sing along, hardcore in the best possible way. This was like hugely influential, not only on like further like positive hardcore and everything like that, but you do have a lot of like influence on like power violence with bands like Incest and such, sort of like taking a lot from Ray Capo's vocal style, the very over the top like kind of thing that he was doing on a lot of these records. And you also have, like a lot of the influence from this band and some of the other bands I'm going to talk about of a more metallic kind of feel to it, a little bit more of like a viciousness and an aggression. And even though this band was definitely all about like positivity and everything like that, really did have like this menace to them and this like commitment to their message and their outlook. And yeah, so Youth Today, Break Down the Walls, one of the best of its kind. Another band that we had coming around that same time, started off as like kind of like a younger kind of band, kids sing about straight edge and stuff, very high vocals. It sounds like these kids hadn't even hit puberty yet, but it's very, aggressive and youthful and everything like that. And as this band went on, they changed their name. It became this sort of like more melodic kind of thing. And this band even falls sort of into more of like the Embrace and Dag Nasty, like early emo kind of vibes, but more of like in a melodic hardcore kind of way. So you can really line this band up with a lot of the stuff that came in like the early 2000s off of Bridge 9, some of the Victory material for sure. And you still have like a little bit of like a metallic, the later records more so, but you have a metallic amount of riffage and stuff like that. So we got Bold, Speak Out, and I've talked about this. This record is kind of hit or miss for me. The production on it is like infamously bad. Like, there's not a lot of good things to say about the production. It feels very limp. It's raw in all like the wrong ways. Just mixed terribly. But the songs are solid. Nailed to the X, Always Try, Change Within, Accept the Blame, Wise Up, Search. Always like killing it on the songwriting front. And the message is still very true. It's a solid album musically. Just could have done better with the production, to say the least. And a great album example of amazing production with this kind of music, and this is even more so in the melodic, little bit more emotive kind of direction. Still anthemic, still positive, and still has like a lot to say about how like outside of the direct straight edge hardcore scene, how people view them, how like the media and like other scenes have like kind of misconstrued what their intentions are. And you get Gorilla Biscuits with Start Today, and I'm gonna say it, this is like one of my all-time favorite hardcore records. I feel really bad that I didn't show this in the New York hardcore episode that I did, but this is fire. Just from the beginning, like trumpet, intro of New Direction, just kicks right into it. You got Degradation, Good Intentions, Forgotten, Things We Say, the title track, Competition, Time Flies, Cats and Dogs. Just stacked record. The melodies are just amazing. The lyrics are some of the best songwriting lyrically of this era. Guitar, everything about this is solid. It's their the follow-up to their first 7-inch, which I really do like, but it is very amateurish. It does have that kind of sloppiness to it. It's still a classic, though. This is definitely a mature record. This is showing a lot of, like, foresight into what would be coming. You hear a lot of, like, In My Eyes and 10-Yard Fight and Have Heart and that, like, late 90s, early 2000s, like, Boston style stuff. You can hear a lot of that in Gorilla Biscuits. This band, continues on. They're playing This Is Hardcore this year. I missed them when they played in Hamden because those tickets sold out before I even knew they were fucking available. But yeah, Gorilla Biscuits, legendary album. And, you can't have a conversation about this early Youth Crew kind of stuff and not talk about this band. This is a band that definitely introduced more of that militant, like, violent kind of side to it. Somewhat of, like, misconceptions. I still feel like the songwriting on here is extremely underrated. I feel like they were talking about things that a lot of people were not touching at the time. Not as far as, like, violence and fighting and being against drugs and everything like that, but also just talking about how, like, feeling let down by those around you and having this, like, kind of community that's supposed to embrace, like, inclusion and reject racism and everything like that, yet it's so close-minded, and you have to dress a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to play a certain way. A lot of that mentality, and this band was definitely, like, rebelling against that, even though a lot of the people that were really, like, pushing that mentality were probably very much into this band, because you have that aggression, you have that violence, you have that kind of, like, antisocial attitude that kind of, can be read into this band. And, again, really huge as far as, like, the emerging metalcore kind of sound. You can definitely hear a lot of this in Earth Crisis and Integrity and all those fucking bands. Judge, Bringing It Down. This is another one of those classics. Probably my two favorite records I'm going to show off in this video are this and that Gorilla Biscuits record, and then one of the 7-inches is definitely up there as well. And yeah, not much to be said about this. You got Porcell on guitar, who was also in Music Today, and Mike Judge on vocals. Just a very gruff, abrasive kind of delivery. A little bit of Paul Bearer. You got a little bit of John Brannon. You got some, you got all, like, the boxes checked, maybe a little bit of choke in there, but it's aggressive. It's like big guy hardcore, as I've always called it. It's like that, just like intense, like personal lyrics as well. Again, you have that kind of like disillusionment with what's going on around you and seeing all this hardcore stuff and like, are we really in it for the right purposes, or are we in this just to like start fights and be tough and just exclude people? And I feel like this record really like goes about it in the right way, and it got misunderstood, as many of this stuff does. A lot of people love to look at this band and their material as just like, oh, they're just violent, militant thugs. And it ain't nothing like that, man. Even on their first 7-inch, you have a song called, I think it's In My Way. and it's talking about you know, members of his family, you know, like hurting, you know, their self-destructive attitude towards life and how that affects everyone around them, their children and everything like that. And then you get this album, Take Me Away, great little like intro. You know, really has that disillusion, but also just like, if we don't stick together, you know, then all the bad stuff is going to take over. We're going to, you know, end up fighting each other. And that's no way to get that shit done, as we all know. Bringing It Down, you have a great, like, anti-racist kind of song, which really does have, like, a bit of a change up at the end, what it's talking about, you know, the straight edge. And this is definitely the lyrics you could take to being the more, like, militant side of things. But I really get it, because it does have that, like, you know, your irresponsibility is ruining this scene, and, you know, think before you do this shit. Think about who you're hurting. Think about the kind of image that it draws from people. You got the storm, just this slow, brooding, kind of like song of revolution and change, and just, this album definitely brings it home. Like You know, it's a great song about, like, you see me as this big tough guy, but really we're one and the same, and, you know, the more respect we have for each other, the, you know, the better things can come out of it. So yeah, I might be reading into some of these lyrics a bit, but yeah, this is a fucking gem. Very good album. And it wasn't just New York that you have a lot of bands coming up. Obviously, you have Uniform Choice coming out of the West Coast, along with 7 Seconds, and these are hugely influential straight edge, hardcore kind of bands. Another band that was coming up around that time, and this is a compilation of 2 7-inches. This was put out later by Revelation, but I feel like it fits the conversation well enough. That is Chin of Strength. The One Thing That Still Holds True compilation. Like I said, this is 2 of their 7 inches of material at the time. I believe it's on black. Yeah. And yes, Chain of Strength, sort of very much, I think, of Uniform Choice with this record. A little less of a, like, Minor Threat worship to it, and you have, again, sort of like more of an Embrace and like Dag Nasty kind of vibe with the melodies and the vocals. The songwriting is top notch. You have great like anthemic stuff like True Till Death and Impact. Space Between. You have a lot of stuff about like, you know, friendships gone sour, relationships gone sour, Too Deep Until Now, just these great, like, anthemic, posi-core, you know, like, just, this record does not age badly at all, you know, it's just a lot, this stuff stays true. That's what I love about, like, straight-edge hardcore, kind of to get off on a tangent for a bit. This stuff is timeless, because everybody, the theme of youth and like finding your way and standing by your beliefs and sticking by your friends, this all remains true throughout the generations. And having an outlet to talk about it is very important, and you don't see a lot of that being encouraged by anybody but, you know, hardcore and these more youth-driven subcultures. And yeah, so this is a great album for the more West Coast kind of feel. And this is another important record for me. More moving into like the metalcore kind of stuff of the late 90s. But back when it was still like metallic hardcore. Again, you got bands like Integrity and Earth Crisis, a lot of that like Victory kind of style hardcore. Yeah, so you got Inside Out, No Spiritual Surrender from 1990. This is a beast. 4 songs of just pure aggression and just fury. And this band is very famous in the aftermath of featuring one Zach De La Rocha of Rage Against the Machine. And yeah, this is and this also is very reminiscent. I don't know if it's like a Krishna style as far as like the lyrics and everything, but you do have that kind of element in the music. And I guess the lyrics, you have songs like No Spiritual Surrender and even Burning Fight. I've heard a couple of Krishna-oriented bands cover Burning Fight. And it's just this emergence of like a bunch of different kind of like outlooks on things. You got the Krishna consciousness, but you also have like a strong amount of like black consciousness, and like that wasn't very common in hardcore. You had stuff like Bad Brains, which definitely had a strong emphasis on black consciousness, but I feel like this band, worked it in very well within this scene that was admittedly very white dominated and very like young suburban style males dominated. It was in the city, but a lot of these kids did come out of the suburbs and still had that kind of New Jersey, Connecticut kind of vibe to them. And no disrespect there, but this has definitely more of like a street level, urban kind of like aggression to it. I believe these guys were out of the West Coast as well. I'm not so sure because as far as I remember, Zach was a West Coast guy and has been a West Coast guy. But either way, this is a solid release. And I bring up Krishna real quick. Another band to check out is Shelter, which features Ray Cappo on vocals. Just amazing stuff. 108. There's some really good Krishna stuff out there. You got to dig a little bit. Some of it's a little bit just like, okay, whatever. But if you're not into the faith and everything like that, it can get a little like preachy for sure. A lot of, you could say that about straight edge as well, by all means, So I'm gonna show one last one, and then I got a couple of compilations. So this is a modern one. This is the Rival Mob with Mob Justice. Great Boston hardcore out of this band. This band really does fit with like the classic sounds of Revelation. Later on, Revelation started getting into more of like the indie and emerging emo scenes. You had some really good stuff on there, like Texas is the Reason. But they were definitely going off in different directions. Sinking Ships was another big, like, kind of different types of sound for them. A little bit more like, I can't remember what the hell it sounds like. I apologize, but it was definitely a different sound. You got this on a nice clear red. And Rival Mob really does, like, take a lot of those early influences, more from, like, Judge and Youth of Today than, some of the more melodic stuff I've talked about. And this band is, like, ruthless, like, doesn't give a fuck about anything, just real, like, more of a skinhead vibe. You could even, like, compare this to some of the early stuff from Agnostic Front and Warzone, Cro-Mags, all that more, like, skinhead-oriented hardcore before a crossover took over everything. And this is just, like, brutal all the way through. Mob Justice, Boot Party, Life or Death, Be Somebody, just all the way through. Doesn't give a fuck, does not pull any punches. as they say, hardcore for hardcore. You know, this is a killer modern hardcore record. It's a bunch of years old. I believe this was like 2010, 2013. So yeah, it's about 10 years old, but definitely worth checking out. That classic sound, probably one of the best live bands I've ever seen. Not sure if they still play, but, you know, always good to represent them. Okay, so getting into a couple of compilations. This one is from the early 2000s. And we got Revelation 100, and this is a compilation of sort of rarities, I guess, of like a lot of the big bands on here. And you see that change in like approach as far as these bands. So you got Burn, which is a very like prog style, like very metallic, very much a hardcore band, but you got that like almost like progressive playing and just so much more forward thinking. Is Into Another on here as well? Into Another is a band that I don't own anything by, but they definitely fall into that more sort of like a little bit of a proggy influence as well. You got Sensefield, which I'm not as familiar with, but I believe that's more of like a melodic hardcore kind of emo. Hybrid, Shai Hulud, Fast Break, Quicksand. You got Gorilla Biscuits, Himza, Youth of Today, Side by Side, Movie Life. You got the Slipknot band, which is not the, you know, the masks and like metal, new metal Slipknot. This was a band that was part of the early 90s Revelation scene going on. I'm not as familiar with them. I've been meaning to pick up the 7-inch that came out in Revelation. Haven't come across it in a while. Got Judge. I don't know if I said Sick of It All, Side by Side. Just solid, you know, B-sides of stuff. I like a lot of the more melodic, emo kind of stuff on here. Yeah. So if you want to hear some, like, lesser-known gems, and really this does, like, show that, like, Revelation did go off in a bunch of other directions. There is a lot of variety on this label, a lot of, like, evolution throughout hardcore in the 90s and metalcore and all these kind of things. And then, to end it off, another one I've shown before, but I think is really cool. So you got the early 2000s, a lot of these labels were kind of getting a second life under like a little bit of a different circumstances, and you also had the uprising of labels like Bridge 9 and FDR and Triple B and all these other record labels that were really dialing into what made these bands on Revelation in the early days so influential and so important, and bringing it into the modern day. So we got Generations, a hardcore compilation. Like I said, I showed this off before. This one does have Sinking Ships, I believe. No, it doesn't. This is more of like straight ahead hardcore kind of stuff. You got a lot of variety, though. You have Mind Eraser, who is more in the power violence, like fastcore kind of vibe. Go It Alone, straight up, like a Youth of Today worship. Lions of Judah, really cool. Blacklisted, used to see them a lot back in the day. Iron Boots, you have more of that, like, skinhead-oriented, like, early 80s hardcore kind of stuff. Cold World, you have a very, like, hip-hop influence in there, and Righteous Jams. Oh, you do have Sinking Ships on here. So yeah, you got a lot of different stuff happening on this record. Very cool though. Mental, fucked up. Yeah. So early 2000s hardcore. Can't go wrong with this. So if you love stuff coming off of Bridge 9 in that era, definitely go with this compilation. Good ass stuff. And that'll do it. So yeah, I mean, I really love doing these, look backs at important labels for me and stuff. And I got a whole list of stuff I want to get into. Originally, I was gonna do SST Records, but I feel like starting off with that might be a little bit overdoing it. Everybody, that's a pretty popular label, and so is like Revelation. But I feel like locally, this is an important label to like the local kind of music scene coming out of New Haven, Connecticut. It definitely formed a lot of those like early kids coming up in the late 80s and got them into this kind of stuff. And now they're all, they all have legendary bands, and the New York scene was very much helped by this label. And yeah, so solid stuff. Cannot say enough about how much I love the music coming off of Revelation. And yeah, so like, I want to do more of these. Victory Records would be a really cool one to do. Bridge 9, obviously. Profane Existence, get into that more like crust punk kind of stuff. Havoc Records, go overseas and do some stuff on Propaganda and MCR over in Japan. There's a ton of little smaller labels that came out of that. Just endless amounts. And if you ever want to see me talk about a label, down there in the description, down there in the comments, leave a comment. Tell me what you want to hear about, and make any suggestions. I'm open to suggestions, long as I have a decent amount of material in my collection. Down to talk about important bands, important labels, important scenes. Want to do a lot more of the regional spotlights. I only did one. I did on New York Hardcore. Very successful, very killer video. People seem to love it. So I want to do more from there. Boston Hardcore, go over to Finland, go over to Sweden, do some stuff on early like Brazilian metal. No limitations here, So yeah, and go back in the catalog a bit. I love doing these videos. I love talking to y'all about killer music of all sorts, of all different backgrounds. Eventually, I'm gonna get into a little bit of hip hop, not spoiling anything, but I got 2 or 3 videos in the works that are definitely gonna dive more into that. We got a 30th anniversary of one of the greatest albums of all time coming up, and I'm definitely going to do a giant video on that and the affiliated branding. So, yeah. And that'll be about it. You want to find me on social media. My Instagram is the Hordes of Manzerfaust, and that'll about do it. So, this is Mike Manzer with another Manzerfaust Productions video. Stay fucking metal.